this lecture or this video is going to be on chapter 15, specifically both lectures 19 and 20. And so the point of this video is a lot of people get really intimidated by the brain, which rightfully so. It's very complex, there are lots of parts, but essentially this video is to really summarize it as much as possible. Like, how can we break this information down to a half piece of paper, right? So we won't talk about everything today that you need to know for your exam, but this is a great way to review of making sure you understand both the big picture, how these systems relate to each other, but also to just be able to really break it down into some bite-sized pieces. So first and foremost, make sure you have this written down on like a scratch piece of paper or something, or in your notebook, because this is going to be the guideline for how we kind of go through things, okay? So first off, there are four major parts of the brain. The cerebrum is the part that you think of when you think of the brain. If you were to draw one or you see one in a cartoon, right, this is what you think of. The big folded part of the brain that has both the left and right hemispheres. Then something maybe you aren't as familiar with is the diencephalon, right, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. So we're going to go through each of these. First, we're going to start with the cerebrum. This is the place of conscious thought. And so it has a ton of neurons here in this cerebrum. So maybe let's add that this is the place of conscious thought. Let's add that. Right? It has an outer cortex, and the outer cortex so basically, one thing I want to say here is that it has this outer cortex and it has an inner layer. And the outer cortex I wrote here is gray and the inner is white. And what that means is when something is myelinated, it gets this whitish appearance because myelination is like a very fatty phospholipid material, and so it gets this white fatty. So gray, what does gray mean? It means no myelin. Versus the inner layer, which is white, is yes, it has myelin. So that's important because remember that myelination is directly correlated to the speed at which signals are transmitted. Then you have two hemispheres. You have the left and the right cerebral hemispheres, which people talk a lot about, like, oh, I'm more left side brained or I'm more right side brained, that type of thing. So the hemispheres, it's that big divide down the middle of the brain, and that is the longitudinal fissure. Okay, but there is a point where they do connect because you can't just have two completely different parts of the brain without them connecting at some point. So where do they connect? They connect at what's called the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum. Okay. Cool. So then the cerebrum here, we know that it has the left and right parts, or left and right hemispheres. But you also have lobes of the cerebrum. So we've talked about this before. There are 5 lobes. There are the frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, and insula. Okay. And so each of those have main parts, which you can go through. We've talked about them quite a bit. So make sure you just go through and know those. Okay, so now with the diencephalon, there are 3 parts of the diencephalon. There's the epithalamus, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. And remember your words too. You can use anatomy, either thalamus, and then if it's the epithalamus, it's above the thalamus, and if it's the hypothalamus, it's below the thalamus. So an easy way to remember that. And so what does the epithalamus do? So the epithalamus has, it has the pineal gland, right? The pineal gland. And what does the pineal gland do? It's going to secrete melatonin, which we know is a hormone that regulates the circadian rhythm, so for sleep. And then it also has the habenular nuclei, but that is not as an important thing. But I would just know that the epithalamus contains the pineal gland, which is important for melatonin and for sleeping and regulating that circadian rhythm. Then the thalamus, right? This is really important place. This is where all of the sensory impulses from all of the conscious perception comes in, and it's all converging in this place. So this is basically like, what would be the equivalent? Like, this is just like the main hub of something, like Times Square or something like that. This is where all the sensory information comes. So we could call it, it's like the main relay point for sensory information. Okay? And then the hypothalamus has what's known as the infundibulum. It has the infundibulum, and then it also has the pituitary gland. So don't get these two mixed up. You have the diencephalon, which has two parts, it's three components: epithalamus and the epithalamus, thalamus, and the hypothalamus. The epithalamus has the pineal gland. The hypothalamus has the pituitary gland. So make sure you know that. An easy way